Hey, here we have some standard. This is a deck that I've been brewing and working on and off for like the past week. It is my own creation, mostly just to have fun. I'm never going to claim this deck is remotely close to tier 1. It's just fun and I like playing it. So the idea came from Crested Sunmare being a fun card. Crested Sunmare, at the beginning of each end step, you get a 5/5 horse if you gained life that turn, and it makes other horses you have indestructible. Two Sunmares make each other indestructible, and obviously you want to gain life whenever you can on your turn or on theirs. And to do that most easily, you need lifelink. So we have Legion's Landing for some lifelink vampires. Martyr of Dusk does not itself have a lifelink, but it dies into a 1/1 with a lifelink, which, it being really annoying to remove, and being able to chump block twice, or trade with something and then trade with something again against small creature decks is really valuable. Gifted Etherborn, the 2/3 Death Touch, lifelink, trades with basically anything, and lifelink is great on it. It's very good at stopping up boards for aggro and also trading off against like gear hulks out of control. And then we have 4 Aerial Responder, which is also really powerful against aggro decks. Just a 2/3 Flying Vigilance is going to stop a horde of 2/2s in their tracks if the controller of the 2/2s doesn't have burn spells or removal for them. So that gives us 14 sources of lifelink creatures to turn on our Crested Sunmares. In addition to that, we have some other incidental life gain. Our removal suite of Moment of Craving and Vraska's Contempt both gain 2 life at instant speed. Moment of Craving mostly being there for the small creature decks that I really just need a little bit of extra removal for. Also for killing Glint Sleeve Siphoners out of the Grixis energy deck. Very good for killing those. I mean, obviously it could be a fatal push, but the gain 2 life clause is really relevant in this when you have Sunmare, or when you're playing against aggro in general. And you can also use it to, like, say, give a Gear Hulk -2/-2 and gain 2 life when it gets flashed in to block your Sunmare, at which point, instead of it eating your Sunmare, you kill it with your Sunmare and you get a 5/5. So that's nice. So we've got the Vraska's Contempt and Moment of Craving, and then the other part of our removal package is 3 Ixalan's Binding. Ixalan's Binding and Vraska's Contempt, I have 7 of them together. And they're really good at dealing with the hard-to-remove sticky threats that are everywhere in Standard right now. You've got, Planeswalkers like Angrath, Chandra, mostly Chandra, and Scarab God, Rekindling Phoenix, Hazaret, take out a Gear Hulk. If you Ixalan's Binding a Torrential Gear Hulk, they can never cast them for the rest of the game. Having these 7 sources of just exile target creature or planeswalker, and sometimes it doesn't come back, and sometimes you do it at instant speed and you gain some life. It's just really powerful. A lot of times I've just won off casting resolving Ixalan's Binding on Scarab God and Torrential Gear Hulk against some control decks, because they're like, oh, all of my win conditions are exiled and I can never cast them for the rest of the game. I guess I'm done. You also have Settle the Wreckage for, well, basically anyone attacking you if you're against aggro decks, and you can Settle the Wreckage to just, completely blunt their assault, or if you're against a control deck and they attack with, two Scarab God reanimated things in the Scarab God, you can get them with Settle the Wreckage. It's just nice to have an emergency, like, I need to get rid of everything on the board. Let's get rid of all of their creatures. And since, for the most part, you're worried about things attacking you, it's quite nice. Grind to Dusk is kind of 2 modes. You have the first mode of just, like, I need to kill some cheap, stupid creature, like Glint Sleeve Siphoner, or tiny creatures out of Ramen Up Red, or vampires, or whatever. And then the second version is I need to cast it for 6. Let me exile that Scarab God for 6. So it's kind of a two options. Sometimes you go for the really small creatures, and sometimes you spend a lot of money to mana to get rid of the really big creatures. In addition to the Sunmares, then we have the 6-card grinding package. These are there, also some Arch of Araskas, but these are there so that as the game goes late, because we have essentially what is a giant pile of lifelinkers that aren't particularly good at closing out the game and removal, the games tend to grind on pretty long, because basically you're just like sitting there removing their threats, getting in, gaining some life, and then they remove your creatures and you both kind of stare at each other. So you need some way to make it so that when a game goes long, you're the one who's going to win. Treasure Map does an excellent job of that, giving you 3 scries and then an extra draw 3 cards once you flip it. Profane Procession is just nuts if you get enough mana to utilize it properly. If you cast this and resolve it against most of the control decks, they just can't win, because they have to... I mean, their only creatures are Gearhulks and Scarab Gods, and they can't remove it because they're playing blue-black. So they're like, okay, I have to play 3 Gearhulks and or Scarab Gods into this Profane Procession, and then they get to cast the Gearhulks back at me, like, and they can't deal with it in any way. It's just disgusting. If you resolve this against blue-black control, you just win. Overwhelming Splendor looks stupid, and yeah, it's probably not right, to be entirely honest. Yeah, I could see it being right in the sideboard, though. This card, if you resolve it, you win. It's kind of that simple. You've got a huge amount of ways to delay the game, because almost everything else in your deck is lifelinking creatures that trade pretty decently, or removal, or I guess Sunmares, which kind of take over the game. I'll go back and say a few more words about Sunmare later. But you've got tons and tons of ways to slow the game down. You're playing 25 lands, and also the treasure map. You play a treasure map on turn 3 and start scrying, and on turn 5 you flip it, and then you cast Overwhelming Splendor on turn 6 or something, because this is a land and you get 3 treasures. And I mean, when your opponent is casting 1/1 Scarab Gods that can't reanimate anything, and their Gearhulks don't flashback any stuff, and all of their stuff sucks forever, and they've got no way to deal with it, the game's kind of over. I've never been able to cast this card and lost unless it got countered. So if you can maneuver a situation to get this in play, you're golden. So anyways, the last word is, why am I doing all this work to make some horses? Crested Sunmare is a hell of a beating if you can trigger this a couple times. Like, even if you just play it and trigger it once, like, okay, I have an aerial responder that you weren't able to kill. I hit you for 2 and play on turn 5 a Sunmare and get a 5/5 token, because you didn't hold up enough mana to kill the Sunmare as it came into play, because short of counterspells or 4 mana removal, there's nothing that kills this at instant speed. Like, I guess you can harness lightning it if you've got a bunch of energy, but there's not a whole ton of energy decks that have huge piles of energy sitting around nowadays, like the Glint Sleeve Siphoner and the Whirler Virtuoso tend to spend it fairly quickly. And once you start making horses with the Sunmare, I've found that not a lot of people have great ways to deal with it. A lot of people's removal is Fatal Pushes and Abrades and Lightning Strikes and Glorybringer and Chandra, but all of those, don't hit the Sunmare. They do have... People are playing answers to the Scarab God, and so they do have ways to deal with the Sunmare, but it's really strong, especially just playing it and getting a 5/5 that turn. So good. And I have taken over a lot of games with just Crested Sunmare, gain some life off one of my life linkers, next turn I'll Vraska's Contempt your guy, gain 2 life, get a 5/5, and a pile of 5/5 indestructibles are hard to deal with and definitely win the game. Moving to the sideboard, you've got 3 authority of the consuls, which A, triggers the Crested Sunmare whenever your opponent plays a creature. B, they screw over all those haste things, and C, they just gain you a ton of life, so they're great against aggro. Duress is just there to take counter spells out of your opponent's hand, see what they've got. Really good against control. Lost Legacy is there for Approach of the Second Sun decks. I'm pretty sure I'm going to start taking this out and putting in something else. It's just not really playing its weight. Occasionally you can like bring it in to get exile all the copies of Scarab God, but most people post sideboard diversify enough that hitting Scarab God with Lost Legacy isn't great. Golden Demise is another card that's great against aggro. Almost all of our creatures are fine against Golden Demise. So Mutter of Dusk sure dies, but it gives you a 1/1. The Gifted Aetherborn and the Aerial Responder survive it. The Crested Sunmare survives it. And also this deck gets Ascend very easily between Treasure Map, a lot of its removal, leaving behind enchantments. Legion's Landing gives you an extra thing. You get extra tokens if you've got Horse in play and you just play a lot of lands. So it's quite realistic to get up to the Ascend for this. Not that it matters a whole lot, but it does happen. Settle the Wreckage, also against aggro, and then against mid-range and control, you also put in a couple Cruel Realities because they don't have a whole ton of creatures running around, and if you can just say like, alright, well, you want to play a grindy game against me? Well, I'm going to cast this enchantment on you, and as soon as it resolves, I basically win. Because you're going to lose 5 life a turn or sacrifice one of your very, very few creatures. So Cruel Reality is really good in the control and or mid-rangey matchups. So the way you're looking to play this deck out is against aggro. Against everyone, you wanna play like a couple lifelinkers on the first few turns, and then build up to the point where you remove any big threat they play while threatening to gain a bunch of value off of like Treasure Map or Anointed Procession. At some point you try to slam a Sunmare and get some 5/5 tokens rolling with that, and then use that recurring value to take over the game from there. And make sure that they can't do anything too ridiculous because you've got 4 Vraska's Contempt and 3 Ixalan's Bindings preventing anything disgusting from happening. So that's the deck. I recorded an entire league of matches with it, but the videos vanished, and I have no idea where they are. So I'm going to go and look at the replay of one of my matches that I played against someone, and I told him that I had been recording it, so I kind of feel bad if I don't show that match, but unfortunately it's going to be a replay instead of the live thing. So here was a match that was pretty sweet, in my opinion. At least from what I remember of it, it was enjoyable. So I'm not too used to talking through replays, but I'll do my best. So here I've got a turn 2 Aetherborn. If I draw lands, I get to put Aerial Responder into play. I've got both my colors very well fixed, and I've got some removal if I get to 4, and then at 5 I can start dropping Sunmares. So this hand looks really good. Also, my opponent's on the play, and I'm on the draw, so I saw this, was very happy. So my opponent leads on this. I'm thinking, hey, he's probably some kind of Grixis mid-range, like always, and, start running out my creatures. Censor tells me that it's probably some kind of control variant, and then I run out the Aerial Responder, since I don't really have a reason not to just keep running out my spells. And then Vraska's Contempt, and now I'm pretty sure he's on some kind of control variant, and I'm going to just start keep running out my threats, since he's not putting any pressure on the board. I attack with the Sunmare, thinking, okay, well, if he... when I attack with the Sunmare, I think, okay, well, if he Gear Hulks in response, like, I'm going to cast the Gear Hulk, I exile it, it's fine, he doesn't have any special value to get out of his graveyard with Censor or Vraska's Contempt. So I'm not super worried about a Gear Hulk. Cast the Sunmare here and see what he does, which was an Essence Scatter. And I just keep getting in with the 5/5. Apparently he's got no way of dealing with it. spends 6 mana on a Gear Hulk. And Vraska's contempts my horse. And I let him untap with this because I mean to give him the opportunity to counter the Vraska's contempt, so that I can then Ixalan's Binding the Torrential Gear Hulk, trapping all of his remaining Gear Hulks in hand. When I draw the second Binding, I decide to run it out and try to get rid of Gear Hulk. He plays his second Gear Hulk and censors my Binding, because the reason he does this is he has no counter magic in hand, and or at least my assumption at the time is he has no counter magic in hand. He knows that once the Binding resolves, he's never going to be able to cast a Gear Hulk again, so he has to cast it anyways just to get out of his hand, and so he might as well censor this to prevent me from being to force me to pay 1, because there's no reason not to. So I get one of the Gear Hulks gone. He can't cast more Gear Hulks, but he's got a Gear Hulk in play. Beats me down for a bit. And here I'm just going to Vraska's Contempt his guy to get it out of the way. He casts a Glimmer of Genius. And it resolves. So now I've got a 2-1, and he's got a Search for Azcanta, but I also have Arch of Orazca, which, by the way, is fantastic. Just when you consistently ascend and go into a late game where you're both kind of top decking, having Arch of Orazca is such a huge positive. And I also have a Field of Ruin specifically for Azcanta itself. So getting in with Mortar of Dusk and playing out some guys. And now my plan is, well, I've got an Ixalan's Binding if he casts a Scarab God. I've got an active Arch of Orazca, and I'm just going to sit here drawing cards and beating him down with shitty little creatures until he does something, at which point I will exile it. And I have another Vraska's Contempt so that I can exile the next thing that he does too. Now he's reduced to like casting Harness Lightnings on my 1/1 token. And every turn, draw a card. I wasn't casting the Aerial Responder because it would prevent me from drawing cards off Arch of Orazca because I wouldn't have enough mana to do it. So I'm gonna just keep playing out my creatures. See, you can see how much work this Martyr of Dusk is doing. Like, he's Harness Lightning-ing vampire tokens and the Martyr of Dusk. It's just like really obnoxious for Control to deal with. And I will draw a card. Play a land. Get in for some damage. Force him to do something. And I, of course, destroy Azcanta because I can't allow an Azcanta to survive. He plays out a Scarab God, which I'm going to Vraska's... No, I'm going to draw a card, and then I have Vraska's Contempt to try to get him to counter it, which he does. And then I play Ixalan's Binding, which means that... so I play the Vraska's Contempt because I have an Ixalan's Binding in hand. If I can Ixalan's Binding that, then he can't cast Scarab Gods for the rest of the game, and that's like the majority of his threats is Scarab God and Torrential Gear Hulk, so then he's got basically no threats left in his deck. And so I get him to counter the Vraska's Contempt because he wants to keep his Scarab God alive, obviously. And then I cast the Binding, and then he's like, oh, I can't cast any more threats. All of my threats are exiled forever. I lose, and then he concedes. And of course I was sitting on a pile of creatures and a few draw engines. Well, he didn't have any kind of stuff going on over there. So that was game 1. Game 2, which, spoilers, I lose since there's a game 3. I see treasure map stuff. Hand looks fine. There's no white mana, which is kind of a problem, but draw some there and decide, alright, I will play around Censor. Run out the treasure map, and he thinks for a bit and negates it. Duress a Glimmer out of his hand, and he had revealed Scarab God, Harness Lightning, Spirebrush Canal, and a Gearhulk. So I know he's got, you know, all of his big threats in there. Run out of Sunmare, which resolves. Now I think, alright, well, I'm going to start just attacking and holding up my removal spells and trying to beat him that way. Unfortunately for me, he draws Vraska's Contempt, which takes out my thing. Now, here, I don't start casting my these things because I know he's got Gearhulk Negate, and I didn't want him to Gearhulk Negate it. In retrospect, I think that was probably the wrong play. I probably should have forced him to Gearhulk Negate so that he couldn't Gearhulk and get Glimmer of Genius back, which is what he does here. He casts Gearhulk and gets Glimmer of Genius back. And now I can't really hope to 1-for-1 him, so I'm trying to look for some way to force him to spend enough mana that I can get through. And here I Contempt and he negates. I try to Cruel Reality. And he disallows. I try to Ixalan's Binding. And he plays the second Gearhulk, counters it, and I lose. Now for game 3, I start with some early threats, a way to rip apart his hand, and a pretty good threat in Cruel Reality for the late game. So to look at his hand more briefly, he had this island, and Supreme Will, Harness Lightning, Fatal Push, and the Scarab God. So I know he has a counterspell, but he also has 2 removal spells. I decided not to run the Aerial Responder into the Harness Lightning because I'd rather him Harness Lightning the Martyr of Dusk, because then he won't be able to deal with the Aerial Responder. I draw out with Profane Procession, but I don't cast it because I know he has a Supreme Will, and if I can ever resolve the Profane Procession, then he loses because I just exile all of the Scarab Gods and Gearhulks that he plays for the rest of the game. So if I can resolve this, I win. I know he's a Supreme Will, so I need to figure out how to get him to cast the spells that I want him to cast in less useful ways. At this point, I decide to cast Aerial Responder because if he wants to Glimmer of Genius, because this is the first turn he's on 4 lands, then the Aerial Responder will be alive going into his turn, which means he's going to have to start spending mana, not just like at the end of my turn, but to try to deal with the things that are killing him, and sort of say, all right, well, now that I know you're going to start doing things like play Glimmer of Genius, I will try to tax your mana as much as possible. So here he plays the Harness Lightning, starts using up his mana. I get in with a Martyr of Dusk and say, well, you can still probably counter the Profane Procession. I don't want to run it into like a negate or something. He duresses it. So here's a really key point. So he duresses the duressed me the previous turn. He takes the Profane Procession out and sees a Cruel Reality and an Ixalan's Binding, so he knows it's not safe to cast the Scarab God, and it's not safe to ever tap in such a way where I can cast a Cruel Reality, because if I resolve Cruel Reality, he's done. So now he plays a Siphoner, but he's keeping up the Supreme Will. Like, alright, I'll attack with Martyr of Dusk, see if he trade off the Siphoner, but he doesn't. And I kill it with one of my If Near Deadlands. Search for Azcanta, okay. I get a Vraska's Contempt, so I can afford to use the Ixalan's Binding on the Search for Azcanta, and just keep getting in there with the 2-1, since he's actually getting quite low on life. Chandra, and he's still keeping this up the Supreme Will, because he's still afraid of the Cruel Reality. Plus a Chandra, alright, sure. Play Arch of Orzaka, I ascend. I attack him here, and then Vraska's Contempt. Or am ready to Vraska's Contempt, so on upkeep I Vraska's Contempt to Chandra, seeing if I can make him spend mana, which I don't manage to. Start getting in there with the vampire token, because he's at 4. At the end of his turn, draw with the Arch of Orzica. Still not running my Cruel Reality into his counterspell, but forcing him to always keep up counterspell mana, because otherwise he just loses. I drew on that at that moment because I decided if I could draw, you know, 2 3-drop creature, then I can, you know, so I drew the previous turn because I decided, if I draw 2 or 3-drop creature, I just want to be able to play it because I don't have any instants to play. So here he runs out Scarab God, and I decide to Cruel Reality. I know he has a Supreme Will, so I have to say, all right, you can't counter the Cruel Reality with a Supreme Will. If you counter Cruel Reality with something else, then I get to Ixalan's Binding and get rid of the Scarab God forever. And so either I get the Cruel Reality off, and there's a decent chance he tries to let it go because he has the Scarab God, and I'm assuming his plan is let the Cruel Reality resolve, bring back the Martyr of Dusk, sacrifice it, get a 1/1, bring back the Aerial Responder, and then try to like race me down with like Aerial Responder and Scarab God through the Cruel Reality. But he decides to Supreme Will as Impulse Mode because he can't counter this, and he needs like an answer. So he decides, all right, I need to look for something. So Cruel Reality resolves, and then he's tapped out and has Cruel Reality on him. And now I get to play Ixalan's Binding, exile the Scarab God, and now he can't make a bunch of chumpers for the Cruel Reality. So he's going to flash in a Gear Hulk, but then he's going to immediately have to sacrifice the Gear Hulk. He gets back a Glimmer of Genius, but he realizes, you know, I'm never going to be able to beat a Cruel Reality that's resolved, and concedes. So anyways, this is kind of how the deck plays out against control. You definitely see the way it loses, like in game 2, where, you know, they managed to get to a position where I don't have enough answers, and they can just like keep countering all my answers to their threats. And then you also see the versions where I win, where I just, you know, get in with a bunch of creatures, force them into a bad position, and then they do something, and I slam one of these, you know, game-ending enchantments. This replay didn't really have too much of the Sunmare doing its work, but I assure you, in some matchups, it's quite awesome. So unfortunately the original video got lost, but here was the replacement, and I'll be filming a few leagues of this now and again as I try to tinker with it and make it into a decent deck, because, well, Standard isn't really shitty right now, and so it's fun trying to tinker with it and brew something, and I figure might as well like record the deck creation process of someone trying to create a new deck from scratch. Thanks for watching.